record reflect we are back in session. Parties of the council are present. All members of our jury and our alternates are present. Our witness is Matt. And Mr. McGee, you may continue your examination.
And Dr. Perlin, you in your presentation ready to get to the conclusions, I believe?
Yes, I was.
Please continue to the conclusion.
You want to dim the lights a little here? So, where we were was answering the question of the references in the evidence, and based on the Chula results, comparing all the evidence items with the references, there were exclusionary match statistics, where, again, an exclusionary statistic is a number that's less than 1. 1 in 1,000 is a little exclusionary, 1 in a million is more exclusionary, and so on. The ratio of match to coincidence means coincidence is right. So the first evidence item is the electrical cord, E15 or E01. Here's a photo of it, and comparison was made from a genotype that true allele inferred, separated from the DNA data, and comparison was made with DNA reference samples from 5 individuals, and these are the match statistics. The comparison with Joseph McStay, Senior, was 1 in 115,000, with Summer McStay, 1 in 499,000, with the first McStay child, 1 in 2.1, the second McStay child, 1 in 302,000, and with Charles Merritt, 1 in 101. Another way of representing numbers like this that scientists regularly use is by the number of zeros in the match statistic. So if you have a number like a million is a 1 followed by 6 zeros. So scientists will write down the number 6, indicating how many zeros there were. That way, 3 represents 1,000, 1 followed by 3 zeros. A million is a 6, a billion is a 9, 1 followed by 9 zeros. And on the same scale, we can represent numbers that are incredibly small and incredibly big. And that's what I'm showing on the next slide. If you look at the numbers along the bottom, these are the same numbers that we just saw before, but now they're represented in terms of the number of zeros after the 1, the magnitude. Because they're negative, when we have a number like a million, that's a positive 6. A small number, like 1 in a million, is a negative 6. So all the numbers you're going to be seeing are negative because they're small numbers. They're less than 1, and they're exclusionary. So another new picture that you're seeing on the top right is it's a representation of the inferred genotype based on the match statistics. First, we'll see some more of these, or other evidence items. If you look at the horizontal x-axis, that's represented in terms of the number of zeros. It's called a logarithm, or log, of the likelihood ratio. And that's on a scale here that goes from -4, 6, and this is 0, which means no information. What this curve represents, if you look at the curve, is one has a genotype, and then we can ask for someone who actually contributed their DNA. If we calculated all possible match statistics, what would the distribution be over all the possible trillion genotypes that could exist? In other words, for someone who actually left their DNA, what's the distribution of match statistics? If that curve is near 0, it's not very informative. If that curve is far to the right, at a number like 6, it means the average, the center of the curve is at 6, it means the match statistic to the correct person would be 6 zeros, or a million. If that curve is very far to the right, for example, at 12, if that center wasn't located where we see it here around 3, but it was out at 12, that would be very strong, a very strong genotype. I mean, there's a lot of information in that evidence. If you were to compare it with the right person, you get a match statistic that would be a 1 followed by 12 zeros, or a trillion. Here, on this piece of evidence, the electrical cord, the distribution of all possible match statistics, calculating them on the assumption that this is the person who actually left their DNA, before we make any comparison, is a bell-shaped curve centered at 3. 3 zeros, or 1 followed by 3 zeros, is 1,000. So that's how much information is in this genotype. On average, it would give a match statistic of around 1,000. We can't, in our reports, we often just give the average. That's 3 zeros. But this distribution shows what happens on the full range of values. And so there, it's useful to take a look at this green arrow. That green arrow is the match statistic for Charles Merritt, which is right at -2. There's the -2. 1 in 100 is -2, 1 in 100. And what we see is that his match statistic is to the left of where where the true genotype would be. It's not in the center, it's not to the right, it's away to the left from the match statistics of a true contributor to the evidence.
And being to the left, that would mean that he's excluded.
No, it means there's a statistical support for an exclusion. If you're doing this type of statistical probability analysis, we wouldn't say that somebody's excluded or included. Even if the match statistic was a trillion, you might think somebody's included, but we wouldn't say it. We would just give you that number as the statistical support for somebody being included. So this is the distribution of what the inclusionary statistics would be for someone who did contribute their DNA, looking at all possible genotypes. And Mr. Merritt's match statistic, when compared with the electrical cord, is to the left of what those match statistics would be. So it's informative at the level of 1,000, that's the average, and he's to the left of the distribution of true contributors. You'll see more of those, for better or worse. Okay. The next evidence item, A3, also called E03, is a left bra cup. And here the numbers, whereas when stated as a number, a match between the left bra cup and Joseph McStay Sr. is 1 in 239 million times less probable, 139 times more probable than a coincidence, which means it's pointing away from his being that genetic contributor. It's a number that's much less than 1. The number relative to Summer McStay is 1 in 487 trillion. For the first McStay child, 1 in 15.7. For the second McStay child, 1 in 23.7 billion. And to Charles Merritt, a coincidence is 1.75 trillion times more probable than an actual match. That's a stronger exclusionary statistic. And just writing the number of zeros on the next slide, we see on the bottom, this translates into numbers like -8, -14 relative to Summer McStay. 15 zeros after the 1 is a quadrillion. -15 is 1 in quadrillion. So this is exclusionary information. And that continues across. And then for Charles Merritt, the number is -12. And that represents 1 over a 1 followed by 12 zeros, or 1 in a trillion. So that's stronger exclusionary support. And you see that on the picture here. Here's the number -12, which is the match statistic of Mr. Merritt. This is the distribution of all possible match statistics for somebody who actually left their DNA. We don't know who it is, but that's statistically what the distribution is. And we see that that number peaks at around 8 zeros, or 100 million. So there's a lot of information that the DNA data is trying to tell us, but it's none of these people statistically. And if that's the distribution of the match statistics, that's what the curve is saying, how likely it is to get each of these match statistics from someone who actually left their DNA. Mr. Merritt is far away on the left at a -12. So it's very unlikely that he contributed his DNA to the left broad cup. Item E-11, or also E05, is a white cord that also gives exclusionary statistics. A match between the white cord and Joseph McStay Sr. is 1 in 16.4 thousand more probable than coincidence, or you could flip the numbers and say basically the strength that's excluding him is 16.4 thousand. With Summer McStay, the number is 1 in 182 million. For the first child, it's 1 in 113. The second McStay child, it's 1 in 4.24 billion. And the chance of coincidence is 19 billion times more probable than an actual match between the white cord and Charles Merritt. It's showing that statistically he's excluded from that evidence item. And here are the numbers, represented as the number of zeros. Charles Merritt's a -10, which is 1 in 10 billion. So that's pointing away from him, much more likely to be a coincidence. Here, the distribution of match statistics for someone who did leave their DNA is at around 5 zeros after the 1. There's a 5, there's the peak of that curve, which is about 100,000. And if you look left and right, it doesn't extend that much past 0, and Charles Merritt is over here at -10, far away from true contributors. For E08, the strap, also called A25, there's a photo on the left. Again, we get exclusionary statistics that point away from all 5 references. For Joseph McStay Sr., the number is 1 in 1.55 thousand. For Summer McStay, it's 1 in 6.45 million. For the first McStay child, it's 1 in 4.06. For the second McStay child, it's 1 in 4.39 million. And for Charles Merritt, the exclusionary statistic is 1 in 1.76 million. And here, -6 means 1 in a million, which is a lot less than 1. It's an exclusionary statistic. If we look at the distribution of all possible genotypes for what their match statistic would be for someone who actually left their DNA on that contributor for the strap, the center is around 3, so it has inclusionary power for someone who's there, on average around 1,000. And if you go left and right and you look at the distribution, it becomes much less probable as you move to the left that you would see a match statistic this small for someone who actually left their DNA. And there's -6, 1 in a million for Charles Merritt. He's far away from the distribution of match statistics for someone who did leave their DNA. E09 is the right broad cup, and again, we have exclusionary statistics. On those numbers, the likelihood ratio or match statistic for Joseph McStay Sr. is 1 in 224,000. For Summer McStay, it's 1 in 2.85 thousand. For the first McStay child, the exclusionary statistic is 1 in 20.6. For the second McStay child, it's 1 in 10.1 thousand. And for Charles Merritt, it's 1 in 3.06 million. We'd seen that before lunch. And this is what it looks like visually. This is the distribution of all genotypes for someone, the match statistic for someone who left their DNA. And the average there is about 6 zeros after the 1. That's 5, there's 6 zeros is the peak. So about 1 million would be the match statistic. It's an informative genotype. The data has components that are giving a lot of information. On average, about 1 million-fold. And as you go to the left of that distribution of true contributor genotypes, we look at the arrow for Charles Merritt, and he's at -6. Again, far away from true contributors. So all the statistics that we calculated were exclusionary. And I think that's the last slide that I have that delves into the math, statistics, graphs, figures, and other useful pictures.
If you could retake the stand, please. One thing I did notice in the statistical results was that all of the results for child number 1 were significantly lower than the others. Because the amount of, or the number of loci available in the known sample, so if it's a lower number of loci known, will that affect the statistical analysis?
Yes, a particular genetic locus will add around, depends on how informative it is, but typically adds half a zero. So the more tested locations you have, the more numbers are added together, and the larger the overall strength of evidence can be. In this case, let me just turn to that in the case packet where the genotypes, reference genotypes are given. For the first McStay child, the number of tested locations wasn't 15, which were the number tested in the evidence. Instead, it was only 7. So there's a lot less testing going on. You'd expect the number of zeros in the match statistic to be less and for the number to be smaller because there's less tested DNA that can be compared with the evidence. And that's what makes it smaller.
But to be clear, all the match statistics for all 5 known samples are all exclusionary in nature.
Yes, they are.
So that from a statistical comparison or probabilistic genotyping analysis, the DNA you're seeing is more likely to be found in a random sample than any of the known samples that you're comparing.
Correct, than with anyone to be compared with.
So if we just grab somebody downstairs and swab them, statistically they would have likely more in common with the evidence than any of the knowns that were compared.
And you think about that for a second? It's more about the occurrence of the genotype in the population than comparing somebody with the evidence. So not exactly right.
So if we took the genotype of everybody in the world and averaged those, there would be more likely than a match with that group than it is with the individuals of the known.
The chance of seeing a coincidental genotype is that much more likely than this specific match.
Now, based on the data that was provided about the samples that were in each individual, or excuse me, strike that. Based on the data and analysis of that data by Truly that was done for each individual sample, were some samples were able to develop a genotype or profile for the highest match or the best match as a contributor, like an unknown contributor.
So we saw those distributions, and some of those bell curves were more to the right than others. The ones that were more to the right of 0 were more informative. If they had an average of 12 zeros, that would mean that if you compared with a correct person who really did leave their DNA, you get a number of 1 followed by 12 zeros, or a trillion. Some are less informative. From the more informative genotypes that had larger averages, had more information that would produce a higher match statistic to the true person, we developed from three of the items. For each of them, we developed a genotype which can be turned into a list of alleles suitable for database searching.
So for item E01, I believe it gave the lowest level for the mean on the statistics of 3 on the bell curve.
I think that's correct, yes.
Would reviewing your report be able to refresh your memory on that?
Yes. Actually, I'm going to look at the case packet as well, but I'll look at the report first.
Maybe I have to put back up the slide on showing that statistic analysis. If you, it should be still number 1. If you look to your monitor to your left.
On the monitor.
So E01 had a statistical bell curve mean as a 3. Would that be a fair summary?
Yes, and that would mean that on average, a comparison with the person who actually left their DNA would give about 3 zeros, or a number of 1,000 as an inclusionary statistic.
And the next item, E03 that you tested, had a mean distribution of 8, which I believe is the highest. Would that be accurate?
What do you mean by highest?
Well, out of the 5 comparisons, it had the highest mean score on the bell curve.
Its average is 8, which is a 1 followed by 8 zeros, which is about 100 million, and that was an informative genotype. That is, if you made a comparison with a person who really left their DNA on this item of evidence, on average, that statistic would be around 100 million, a 1 followed by 8 zeros.
And the next item, which is E05, the statistical mean for the bell curve was a 5. Is that correct? You can look to your left.
Yes, the expected match statistic to the true contributor would be around 100,000.
The next item, number 8, the mean was 4.
Correct.
And the last item, E09, the mean was 6.
Yes, that's correct.
And so for items E03, E05, and E09, were you able to compile a genotype for the unknown contributor, the contributor that would most match the statistic?
From that informative genotype that was found, the computer would always produce some genotype, actually whether it was informative or not. What we were able to do was to take that more informative genotype that would have a higher expected match statistic, like 1 million or whatever the number was, and from that produce a list or a profile of in a format that has less information but is suitable for searching on the FBI's DNA database.
And I'm going to show you what's previously marked Exhibit 1019. Do you recognize that exhibit?
Yes, these are the 3 DNA database search files, or CODIS profiles, that we produced from evidence items EO3, the left bra cup, EO5, the white cord, and EO9, the right bra cup, that were included in my report.
And can we go to computer 4? Show you the first page of that exhibit, 1019, on the monitor to your left. Is that the same as the exhibit you're holding?
It
Page
is.
1? Could you explain for the jury what that list tells us?
That might be helpful to point.
Yes.
So the listing on the left are the genetic locations. These are the names CSF, E10 from chromosome 10. On the right is a listing of the alleles that were found at a confidence level, 90 or 95%, of the different genotypes. And in essence, what this is asking which alleles would appear at a probability level of 90, 95%. And it's a listing of those alleles that were found. So for example, at the CSF location, there were 3 alleles, 10, 11, and 12, that appeared in genotypes that made up most of the probability. That means that when that list of 3 alleles is compared with the FBI's CODIS database, should it ever be compared, then it would be compared against reference samples that would have 2 alleles to see if the 10 or 15 million people on the DNA database that the FBI has would be included or have a partial match to those alleles. And that was done for all of the locations. Some of these locations, you just count them. Some of these locations were not in the comparison, like SC33, because we didn't have the genotypes of the reference individuals. So this is about 20 or so genotypes that would be suitable for a database search for investigation if it was allowed to be, or followed the rules from the FBI, to be tested against the profiles they have of convicted offenders to see if somebody who's on the DNA database, who's a convicted offender, would be included using older style match methods in these lists of alleles. So it's useful for investigation. Ultimately, if somebody were found, we'd go back to the methods I've been talking about today to calculate a match statistic. But this is what a CODIS list looks like for database searching. It's lists of alleles in the format that the FBI created in their database 20 years ago. And it's a standard format for doing allele list style database investigative searching.
So, can I jump ahead, but I'll try and go through another few questions. The allele locations, those appear to be not in the same order as the test results, but in alphabetical order. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, we usually list the labs will list their locations in different orders. We will list them alphabetically so that regardless of what lab you're in, it's clear where to find the locus.
And the allele number, identifying number, these appear to be in numerical order. Would that be accurate? So they're not?
Yes, they're sorted in numerical order. When the process is done, there are different allele pairs. There may be one at 50%. Maybe that's at 10, 11. Maybe there's another one present at 20%. That could be at 10, 12. And maybe another allele pair, maybe a 10, 10 for another 20%. Whatever those allele pairs are, the computer keeps looking through that list until it reaches, say, 90% probability. And it takes that list of allele pairs, and whatever alleles are in those pairs is what is produced. So it looks at the alleles themselves don't have probability, but their allele pairs do. And so it looks at a high probability level of what's in the genotype in terms of the allele pairs. And what the list is showing is what were the alleles that were found in those allele pairs up to that 90% probability. And since the order doesn't make any difference as an output of that process or for searching, there's no order on the alleles because it doesn't actually mean anything.
That's what I was going to ask. So when you do a search within CODIS, does the probability strength come any part of the search?
Should I answer, or was that, I thought I heard a partial question.
That was the question. Does, when the CODIS does a search, does probability come into play for their search?
No, it's just based on comparing of lists of alleles.
So if there's a hit, then a person can go back as an analyst and compare either probability or the match statistics to see how good of a match that is. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, so this is derived from a genotype with lots of probability lists and true allele, and it's for searching an FBI-style database. If there were a hit, we could go back to the original information-rich genotype with all of its probabilities and then make a comparison of that separated genotype with the individual who was found through a database search relative to coincidence and calculate a match statistic.
So the numbers that are represented on this allele list are any numbers on this list not supported by the data.
Well, the genotypes, it's an interesting question. If we're doing Bayesian analysis, so the genotypes are a combination of data and prior. So they're all supported by the probability distribution having seen the data.
And that was page 1 of the exhibit. And that genotype is associated with which item? Page 1.
Item E03, the left bra cup.
Go to page 2 of that exhibit, which is also shown to your screen. Same type of list?
Yes, so this comes from a genotype that has information in it for identification. For E05 from the white cord, that was around 5 zeros or 100,000 average information. The genotype listing of allele pairs was looked at up to, say, a 90% level for each of these locations. Whatever the alleles were found were then produced in a list for that locus, and at every locus that list was produced. This isn't for the purpose of matching, and statistical matching, finding a match statistic. It's for the purpose of searching a database to see if there's an individual whose DNA genotype has alleles that are included locus by locus on those lists.
Based on the list, I understand there's a bunch of information about the alleles that could be compared in a later analysis, but we do have a locus that deals with the gender. Would that be something you would look at, like say on this one, if you know if it's maybe a male or female? Does that come up on the profile list?
You can, but it would be more helpful to actually look at the probability of an XX, which is female, versus an XY, which is male. This is mainly for searching.
Okay. And this is, you said, associated with E05, the whiteboard, correct?
Correct.
And then the last page of that exhibit. What do we see here on the last page?
This is an allele list, locus by locus. That's for every locus is listing out the different alleles at a probability level, I think around 90%. And this comes from an informative genotype with lots of probabilities attached to possibilities, with an expected match statistic of 1 million to the correct person, 6 zeros. And this is not that genotype. It's a list of alleles at a confidence level, like 90%, that can be used to make a database comparison to find who might be included based on their genotype, having alleles at each locus that are found in these lists. So it's for database searching if one wanted to find the individual who left their DNA on item E09, the right BRCA.
So on those 3 pages, they're associated with the genotype associated with each individual item. Do any of these genotypes cross over to other items?
Yes, this last one from E09 has a weak association of about 10 with a genotype that doesn't have much information. That's why the association is weak, from the first item, E01.
So from a match statistic, the genotype, or should I say the allele list for E09 relates to also E01 in a weaker match.
Yes, there's some association from the stronger genotype, the more definite genotype on the right BRCA to a genotype on the electrical cord, E01.
So if we took this allele list and typed it into a keyboard coded search, and it came back with an individual, that individual could be compared to a match statistics to item E09 and possibly E01.
Yes, to the original probability genotypes that the computer inferred. You wouldn't use these lists.
So, I mean, it could match, it could not, right? We don't know until you run the comparison, but there's a possibility it's worth looking at.
Correct. And
also speculation.
And in fact, we and some of the True Allele labs who do searches like this will see that sometimes you'll get more than one profile comes back, more than one person comes back based on their genotype. And what we'll see is that if you have maybe a dozen people returning from the database, then a comparison of the evidence genotype with each of those 10 individuals relative to coincidence will produce match statistics. And there's usually 1 or 2 of those people who are identified through a database search who have much stronger match statistics. And based on the DNA evidence, are much more likely to be those people than other people who may have been picked up in a weaker search.
And these allele lists were included in the discovery that was provided, in the case notes that was provided to the parties in this case.
I believe they're actually in my report.
theoretically, if I had access to CODIS, I could do a keyboard search. I could see if there's any possible matches based on just entering these numbers in.
If you had access to CODIS and you're within whatever the searching rules of the FBI were, yes, you could do a one-time keyboard search. You wouldn't be able to do an upload to CODIS because there isn't enough information in these allele lists. So it wouldn't be stored there, matching forever. But there's a lot more flexibility in just checking it once to see if one of the 15 million profiles on CODIS might produce an association for an investigation.
If someone is to sit at a terminal and do a one-time keyboard search, how long does it generally take to get results?
I don't know that.
So it could take a minute, it could take 2 years.
Objection calls for speculation.
And
So if I have these allele lists, is it proper for me to go, well, here's a profile, and we match up some numbers, does that mean they're included?
It would mean they're included on this list, but they may not actually have a statistical association. That would have to be checked afterwards.
That's a totally different analysis than just matching number to number.
Correct. That would be a statistical comparison of the type we've been discussing all day.
we'll take our afternoon recess before beginning class. 15 minutes. Keep in mind the admonitions previously given to you not to form or express any opinions about the case, not to discuss the case. We'll be coming back in about 15 minutes.